Okay, I'll make it 5 o'clock London time. So shall we get going?
Yeah.
Right. So welcome to the SHAC May 2025 seminar and our continuing series. I'm Frank James, Chair of SHAC. If everybody could mute their microphone apart from me and Ellen, that would be very helpful. Ellen will talk for about 20 to 30 minutes, and then we'll have half an hour or so's discussion. Then, as per usual, those on you on Zoom, and I must apologise for the problems we've been having with Zoom, but I think we've sort of rectified them as far as we can participate directly in discussion. Those on YouTube, if you could put your question in the chat box and it will be passed to me and I'll ask the question on your behalf. So this month, the seminar has been given by Hausner, who's a second-year doctoral student in the Department of History of Science, Medicine and Technology at the University of Oxford. Before starting her research studies, she had a career in academic libraries, including almost 6 years in the Special Collections Department of the Bodleian Library. Lucky person. In the autumn, she will take up an Allard Pearson Library Fellowship in Amsterdam, followed by a Brill Fellowship at the University of Leiden. She was awarded the 2023 Jane Willis Kirkcaldy Senior Prize, which recognised outstanding essays in the history of science, medicine, and technology for essay Prima Materia Lapidis, a late medieval chemical scroll and its modern reception. She gained her master's degree in history from the University of Oxford's Department for Continuing Education. And today she is going to talk about early modern alchemical characters, the case of Simon Forman, 1552 to 1611. Ellen, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you all for being here. And sorry for the glitches, but hopefully everyone who wants to be here has made it. I will share my screen. And can everyone see that? Is that a yes?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So, from the medieval era through the early modern period, writers of alchemical literature in Europe used both verbal and pictorial methods of communication. My doctoral project focuses on a third method of transmitting meaning in alchemical discourse. Known very often in the period as characters, these abstract notations and signs stand in for alchemical substances, processes, apparatus, and concepts. The 7 astrological signs of planets to represent 7 metals were used throughout the medieval period, some of them already for many centuries. But from about the mid-16th century, a much richer lexicon of characters started being used. Characters are pervasive within early modern alchemical texts and became a vital language which was developed to transmit meaning. These characters are ubiquitous, and there exist a great number of lists in both manuscript and print which attempted to translate their meanings. However, the ways in which they were perceived was hardly ever directly discussed in the period. To gain an understanding of their social or cultural significance, much of the evidence must be made by association. In the period, the term character was applied not only to alchemical notations, but to letters of the alphabet, to the glyphs used in astrology, to the sigils employed in magic, and to cryptographic signs. In this paper, I will explore how alchemical characters were considered to contain some of the same properties as those found in astrology, magic, and the letters of ancient or sacred alphabets. I will do this using the writings of Simon Forman as a case study. Simon Forman was a successful and somewhat notorious astrologer, physician, who practiced magic and also delved into alchemy in his later years. Lauren Castle's thorough and insightful book has brought him to the attention of scholars in all of these disciplines. He wrote thousands of pages on alchemy, most of which are now preserved in the Hausner collection in the Bodleian Library in Oxford. He made at least 5 separate lists or keys of alchemical characters, revealing the importance he assigned to them. You can see 2 of these on the screen. He did not write specifically and directly about these elusive notations, but some of his works nevertheless include oblique evidence about them. Forman was unique even in his own time, and drawing any conclusions about the period based on his views must be done with care. As eccentric as Forman's ideas were, however, it is possible to situate his beliefs about alchemical characters within an early modern context, so that his writings may give insights into how they were regarded by some practitioners in the period. Simon Forman's investigation of the nature of characters is found in the context of a monumental work called Of Apothecary Drugs, which he compiled between 1607 and 1610. One of the sections in this work is called Characters. Over 4 pages, it goes back and forth between Latin and English in his own words and in quotes by 2 authors he must have seen as authorities, one of whom is Johannes Kepler. Following these ruminations is an extremely long list of alchemical characters with their meanings, covering 10 pages. Forman writes about characters in general, their origin, their nature, their properties, and their uses. He focuses on the characters found in astrology and used in magic, not on those used in alchemy. But because his thoughts about characters in general are followed by the long list of those found in alchemy, it seems he considered alchemical characters to be associated with the other types he described, and classified them as such for a reason. In Forman's view, as I will soon explain, characters as a general category contain some kind of innate power, and they exist in the highest celestial realms. The evidence I will present in this paper will reveal that Forman considered alchemical characters to partake of the same attributes as the others he described. Alchemical characters belong to the category of characters as a larger classification because of their very nature. Forman begins the section by discussing the characters used in astrology. Those are the planets, the zodiacal signs, and fixed stars, as well as the 4 elements. This emphasis on astrology would be expected from a practicing astrologer physician of the 16th and early 17th centuries. Forman then starts discussing other kinds of characters, those that are attached to living beings. He names angels, souls, spirits, devils, and indeed every creature as having both a name and a character. After this brief introduction, Forman describes how a man can use characters to better his constellation. This can be interpreted as meaning that through the use of characters, it is possible to improve one's lot, luck, and perhaps even one's personality or fate, all of which were originally dictated by the planets and signs at the time of one's birth. Characters, then, have potentially great power to make changes for an individual in this world in spite of the astrological forces which dictated a person's situation at their birth. Forman's statement here demonstrates the way in which astrology and magic were blended in his mind. Astrology gives the foundation of a person, but magic can be used for their improvement should they wish. And characters are an important method of doing this. To improve or override one's natal chart, Forman's advice is to, quote, impress in his body the character of a planet, star, sign, or angel, unquote. He outlines the methodology for this. First, the character should be cut into wood. Then some fine gold or gold leaf should be dissolved in the water of sal ammoniac or aqua regis. The seal should be dipped within the liquid and the character then printed on the body. The character can also be drawn freehand with a pen. Wetting it with cold water after letting it dry will ensure that the character remains on the body for a long time. He assures us that he knows this is sufficient, for I myself have seen and do approve the experience thereof. And indeed, he appended at a later date that, on 24th March 1609, he put the characters of Venus, Jupiter, and Taurus on his left arm, and 2 days later the character of the Sun on his right breast. He notes precisely the astrological configurations of the heavens when he did this. This is presumably a demonstration of Forman's attempt to better his constellation, and he shows that it can be done only with sufficient knowledge. That is, one must be able to manipulate or augment specific elements of one's natal chart. As a professional astrologer, Forman had the necessary skill to put his theory into practice. But from his writings, it seems a practitioner would also be able to imprint the character of an angel on their body to help improve their lot. Forman then explores how characters influence humankind by quoting from Johannes Kepler's De Stella Nova in Pede Serpentariae, giving a page number from the 1606 edition. This book by Kepler was written as a response to the supernova of 1604, using the book to assert his views of astrology. Forman only quotes a short section of the book which discusses heavenly characters. In the passage, Kepler discusses how the heavens make impressions on humans at their birth, explaining that there is no quick and happy birth unless the rays and qualities of the planets are appropriately, and indeed geometrically, concordant. He goes on to say, this, however, cannot take place except through the imprint of the character of the entire heaven, which is planted in the generative, nutritive, formative, sensitive, and animal faculties of the person. For the body is too gross to receive such a subtle character of that which is known not by touch but by reason. The passage from Kepler which Forman quotes gives an explanation of the mechanism of celestial influences on humans. At the moment of birth, there is an imprint, a stamp, of the character of the entire heaven on the higher faculties of the infant, all the faculties, that is, except for the physical. The character mentioned here refers to all of heaven, not just one celestial body, and so it seems Kepler considered a complete image of all the constellations and planets to be imprinted on the newborn. According to Kepler, the concept of the character of heaven is intricately related to the light rays which flow from celestial bodies. The measurement of those rays forms the aspects, that is, the angles between two planets as constructed from the Earth. In Kepler's view, the aspects were key to comprehending celestial influences on Earth. This passage explains how they affect a newborn baby. When the aspects between the planets are geometrically harmonious, the heavens will imprint a harmonious character and image. If the aspect is discordant, this is reflected in the person instead. Astrology was of fundamental importance to physicians such as Forman, who needed to calculate a chart to know when to purge, let blood, or administer therapies. Kepler wished to rehabilitate astrology and rejected many elements of its practice that Forman embraced, such as the assignations of signs of the zodiac to parts of the body. It is not possible to know how closely Forman followed Kepler's theories, but we do know at the time that he wrote this section on characters, Forman had a Ptolemaic view rather than a Copernican. In opposition to Kepler, he believed the Earth was at the center of the solar system instead of the sun. Nevertheless, by quoting him here, Forman shows that he considered Kepler an authoritative voice in astrology. Forman was struck by this passage enough to have copied it. He must have been sympathetic to Kepler's explanation of how the character of the heavens was involved in the relationship between celestial forces and humans. A single character for the entire heavens is not the same as the individual characters for the planets, stars, or angels that Forman had just described. Yet Forman seems to have considered this one heavenly character of significance and importance, and a necessary addition for a complete understanding of characters as a category. Forman goes on to include a section of a work which I have identified as a 1544 printed work published under the name of one Pompilius Azalis. The great scholar Lynn Thorndike published his discovery in 1931 that these were the writings of the natural philosopher and engineer Giovanni Fontana from the mid-15th century. Forman would not have known its true authorship or that it was a medieval work. He copied the same section again elsewhere, showing that he considered its contents important. Here he wrote that Persian and Jewish astronomers received the knowledge of the characters for the angels, the constellations, the stars, and the planets through keen vision or through revelation. Characters therefore had a sacred, highly elevated quality. However, characters are also shown to have magical uses. Infernal characters from the region of the damned can be employed for the purpose of lust, discord, secret murders, and to spread disease. But some say that characters can be used for protection against poison, diseases, fire, lightning, wild beasts, snakes, scorpions, mice, and moths. Characters can be used to gain riches, worldly good, and the discovery of hidden treasure. And they can also be used to better oneself or one's station in life, to gain wisdom, eloquence, concord, victory, and friendship. Some say, the book tells us, that these last practices should not be condemned because they are of a natural basis and as remedies revealed to men by angels. Thus, characters are explicitly linked to this in this work to magical practices for good and ill. Forman quotes the same book by Fontana to discuss where characters exist. He does this within the context of the 10 celestial spheres, also known as the 10 heavens. This was a Ptolemaic system of visualizing the universe, with the Earth in the center and the 7 planets each in its own sphere around it. The 8th sphere contained the firmament with the fixed stars and the zodiacal signs. The 9th sphere was the crystalline sphere, and the outermost sphere, the 10th, was known as the primum mobile, the first mover, although there are many variations to these associations over the centuries. Forman describes how the stars which make up the zodiacal signs exist in the 8th celestial sphere, but the characters of the zodiac exist instead in the 9th and 10th celestial spheres. He believed that characters were an innate part of the astrological signs, yet with a unique existence within the higher celestial spheres. The physical part of the constellations, the stars themselves, therefore exist separately from their characters, which exist on higher planes. What I have outlined thus far is a summary of the 4 pages Forman wrote about characters. It was typical of Forman when writing of apothecary drugs to attempt to be as thorough as possible by compiling a variety of sources under one section. Here we can witness him writing in his own words, adding his own experience, extracting relevant quotes from important authors, and attempting to include everything he thought relevant for a full comprehension of the subject. After this exposition, Forman then appended his list of alchemical characters. Like his writings, this key attempts to be comprehensive. It contains some 236 entries of alchemical substances, processes, and apparatus with their designated characters. We have seen that his writings explain all about the astrological, demonic, angelic, and planetary characters that exist, what they are, where they come from, their purpose, and the method of using them. But in all of Forman's writings in this section, he does not mention alchemical characters at all. Because of this, it would be possible to conclude that Forman may have seen alchemical characters as only peripherally associated with the others, and that this section was simply a convenient place to write them. Fortuitously enough, however, we have direct evidence that Forman did in fact consider alchemical characters as directly linked to the others he's discussed. The Index 2 of apothecary drugs contains 5 entries under characters. The second entry is Characters in the 10th Heaven, and the page number given is exactly where the alchemical character list begins, on 588. Forman therefore considered alchemical characters to have a celestial location, which is in the 10th heaven. This puts them squarely in the same category as astrological, celestial, and angelic characters because, as we have just seen, Forman believed that those characters existed in the 9th and 10th celestial spheres. This becomes all the more significant when considering that the original Fontana printed book he quotes only mentioned characters existing in the 9th celestial sphere, not the 10th. Forman added the 10th heaven as one of the location for characters, alongside the 9th. We do not know whether Forman copied directly from the printed text or from an intermediary text, but either way he seems to have believed that characters existed in the 10th heaven as well as the 9th. Alchemical characters therefore have properties which stem not from the physical world, but from the heavenly planes, like all the other characters he mentions. To understand more about how Forman regarded the 8th, 9th, and 10th celestial spheres, we can turn to another contemporaneous work he wrote between 1606 and 1608, titled The Motions of the Three Superior Heavens. Here Forman considered the celestial sphere's natures, movements, and functions. In his exploration of the ninth heaven, Forman asserted that also in the ninth heaven are recorded and set down all the sigils, figures, and characters of all the angels, spirits, and of every particular man, of all the stars and planets, and of every creature of God, celestial, terrestrial, and infernal, as of the earth, the sea, the winds, the four elements, and of every particular animal, vegetable, mineral, and creeping thing, and of all things whatsoever under the prima mobile. This is a statement that characters are not found in the eighth heaven, which is the site of the physical stars, but rather in the ninth heaven. It is notable, however, that every single thing mentioned here, as well as everything named in his discussion of characters, all creatures, spirits, angels, celestial bodies, and four elements, are in the ninth heaven. Yet we know he believed that characters resided in both the ninth and 10th celestial spheres. According to the index entry, alchemical characters reside in the 10th heaven. Of the two heavens in which characters exist then, it seems that Forman believed alchemical characters alone were located in the 10th. The 10th heaven is described by Forman as the highest heaven, or the prima mobile, the first mover. He describes it as the highest heaven and the first heaven created in the creation, after the division of chaos, and was the first beginning of God's work in the creation of things. And this heaven he made to signify himself. Forman associates the three highest heavens with the Trinity, and he attributes the 10th heaven to God the Father. The 9th heaven is Christ, and the 8th heaven is the Holy Spirit. After discussing the incomprehensibility, omnipotence, immortality, and eternity of God the Father, Forman goes on to explain that in this spiritual heaven by God the Father is comprehended the spirits of all men and all creatures, which by their swiftness and speedy motion are always moving and stirring, and are never at rest, but do move as the mind of man continually with the first mover, as the thoughts of man's heart. God himself is incomprehensible, but this heaven is the site of God's comprehension of humans and all other creatures, and the movements of the human mind, the thoughts of man's heart, is linked to the first mover. The 10th heaven is the site of the mind, associated by Forman with Mercury and the spirit, where the 9th heaven is associated with the soul and sulfur, and the 8th heaven with the body and salt. The 10th heaven is also the location of the human senses, as he says, for the spirit is that which giveth motion unto the body, and feeling, seeing, hearing, and tasting. All those 5 senses of man come by the spirit, but the life itself is by the soul of man, which cometh from the 9th heaven. The 10th heaven is therefore the place of the mind, the spirit, the senses, movement, and God's comprehension of his creatures. These are the tools of perception, thought, and understanding. The 10th heaven does not give life, which is the function of the soul, but is instead the site of the higher mental and spiritual faculties of humans. From this, it appears that alchemical characters exist in the same place as God the Father himself. They are of the same stuff as the spirit and of thought. Their location in the 10th heaven shows that Forman did not believe them to be created by humans, any more than he thought that astrological, angelic, or elemental characters were. Rather, these are shapes which exist naturally in the heavens. They may be perceived and comprehended by the wise, as Forman assures us that the ancients were able to do. Forman's placement of alchemical characters in the 10th heaven reveals that they held a particular status in his eyes. Their location in the highest celestial sphere sets them apart from the other characters he discusses, all of which exist instead in the 9th heaven. We have come a long way based on one index entry, but I hope I have shown its implications. By existing in the highest possible celestial sphere, alchemical characters may even have something of a divine nature. This in turn shows how alchemy itself was regarded by Forman as a sacred art. But as well as a celestial origin, it seems alchemical characters were regarded as tools for writing. Another index entry in apothecary drugs is given as characters to write by. Once again, the page number listed is the beginning of the alchemical character list. This shows a completely different quality of alchemical characters. Here they are functional tools to use for writing. Given the context, it would be natural to presume that Forman meant using these characters for writing alchemical tracts. But this is not as straightforward as it seems. Despite making so many lists of alchemical characters throughout his writings, Forman practically never used them in his own works. In all the thousands of pages he wrote on alchemical subjects, he only used a smattering of non-astrological characters. When he did use a specifically alchemical character in the text, which was rare, they were a very standard selection, like those for salt and sulfur. It may be that he planned to use characters in his writings in the future, perhaps in printed works, but this seems somewhat unlikely when he wrote so much by hand. So in what context were these characters to be used for writing? The answer may be to consider alchemical characters as a kind of alphabet. Like many of his contemporaries in the early modern period, Forman was very concerned with the powers of alphabets and letters. And although Forman himself does not include letters as a type of character, there are many examples of other writers who do so, including Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa von Nettesheim in his 3 books of occult philosophy from 1531. Forman often referred to or quoted this work in his writings, and so we know he was very familiar with it. Chapter 29 of Book 3 is titled, Of the Characters and Sigils of Spirits, and it is here that Agrippa begins listing several sacred and magical alphabets. In the introduction to that character, Agrippa states that characters are nothing else than certain unknowable letters and writings which the ancients called hieroglyphical or sacred letters, because devoted to the secrets of the gods only. For they did account it unlawful to write the mysteries of the gods with those characters with which profane and vulgar things were wrote. If Forman considered alchemical characters as belonging to the 10th heaven, it would perhaps follow that he might use them for writing works of a sacred or magical nature. In a manuscript now housed in the British Library, there's a page written by Forman with a list of words and symbols, which I suggest may give a hint of what he meant when he indicated alchemical characters could be used for writing. It is a version of a sentence in Latin taken from the Heptameron, a grimoire or magical recipe book, which gives instructions on how to create magical circles and conjure spirits. This work appeared under the name of the medieval philosopher Peter of Abano, but is now commonly dated to the 16th century. The sentence which Forman wrote out is, according to the grimoire, to be spoken when standing in the magical circle which the magician had already cast. Forman wrote the words in the magical formula in 2 vertical lines down the page and gave each word its own character. This is not an example of writing with alchemical characters as such. However, Forman used a variety of different kinds of letters and signs which stand in for each of the words of the sentence, and the characters for earth, water, air, and fire are those found in his long list of alchemical characters. The magical line from the Heptameron is perhaps the kind of writing to which the index entry could refer. It could be that Forman saw alchemical characters as building blocks of a secret, sacred, magical language, and that they helped to inject a phrase with power, because they partook of a celestial influence. Simon Forman's writings have allowed us to enter into a world where the characters used within alchemical texts are linked to those found in magic, astrology, and sacred writing. There does not seem to be a textual basis for this, and it seems Forman decided for himself that alchemical characters had a heavenly location and that they should be used for writing something other than standard alchemical tracts. I do not think that all his contemporaries would have agreed that alchemical characters existed in the 10th celestial sphere. Indeed, by 1610, many would have questioned the celestial spheres of the Ptolemaic model altogether. Nevertheless, there are several other examples of manuscripts which lend support to the theory that alchemical characters were often seen as related to other figures of power in the 16th and 17th centuries. These examples come in the form of lists of alchemical characters in association with these other kinds of characters, as you can see here in a manuscript from the University of Leiden. While not explicit, the evidence can now be read with Forman's views in mind, demonstrating that at least some other early modern alchemists considered alchemical characters as more than quick notations, shorthand, or a method of writing information from the laboratory. Like alchemy itself, it seems that characters were thought to contain within them deep mysteries and secrets, and perhaps even a touch of the divine. But the exploration of that additional evidence will wait for another paper. Thank you. So I will stop sharing now.
Yeah, thank you, Ellen. That was really interesting. I'll exercise my usual chair's prerogative and ask the first question while everybody else is thinking about questions. Can I talk about this sort of slightly curious, well, at least I think it's curious, Forman using the results of Kepler's heliocentric system, but maintaining a geocentric system. I don't quite understand what's going on. I mean, also, it seems to me that a sort of slightly related question, Forman still seems to be living in an Aristotelian universe, which is probably quite reasonable because this is before Galileo's launched his major attack on the Aristotelian world. But there seems to be sort of slightly peculiar mixing of ideas. I wonder if you've got any sort of views on that.
Thank you. Yes, I think Forman is a good example of this period when there's still a very strong remnant of the medieval system, and I mean certainly the geocentric side of it, but other philosophy as well, worldview. I mean, I think actually a lot of his medicine as a physician is quite medievally based, but at the same time he's very strongly early modern in the sense that he engages very strongly with Paracelsus. He quotes Paracelsus. He copies. He finds ways to reference Paracelsian philosophy. Certainly, the tripartite, the mercury and sulfur and salt quite often. So he does blend the two. Mm-hmm. I think when it comes to Kepler, he was obviously familiar with the work and he drew what he thought was relevant from it without necessarily accepting everything that Kepler wrote. This was a defense of astrology, this book. So in fact, he may not have been completely familiar with how Kepler felt about the Copernican views. And it's very difficult to know how much he engaged, but he extracted what he thought was relevant. And I think it's not unusual to see in this period of, I suppose, even now, extracting what he liked and eschewing the rest. I see Forman as a very medieval character in many ways, but with the early modern period, both in science and in culture, sort of beginning to overlay that.
I mean, a figure that sort of bestrides two worlds as sort of transformational, representing a sort of transformation in how things are going in the sort of end of the 16th, beginning of the 17th centuries.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's, as historians, we have a tendency to think, it's medieval, then it's early modern. And this is a good example of how things are not that simple.
Absolutely not. Yeah. Okay. And this is a good example. Okay. Can I just remind anybody on YouTube that if you've got a question, please put it in the chat box and it'll be passed to me. Alex.
Yes. Thank you very much. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, Alan, wonderful talk. I enjoyed it very much. Congratulations. So in some of the images that you showed of these indices, it appears that there were multiple different characters for the same process or for the same compound. Do you find this to be true? And if this is so, how come there are multiple different characters for the same thing?
Oh, it's definitely true. It's one of these things, it's actually a complex question. So there's no, in the research I've done so far, there are no fixed characters really until the early 18th century. There are some, the astrological characters are very fixed in terms of their represented metals. But a lot of the other ones vary enormously. And there were multiple characters for the same thing. Sometimes it may be that they are different states of the same metal or the same substance. Sometimes not. There are different traditions that, in this case, when you see multiple characters, Simon Forman is bringing together different sources, trying to get a comprehensive idea of what all those different ways of representing Mercury or a furnace could be. But sometimes it's very difficult to know where those characters come from. There's no obvious textual source, either in manuscript or in print. Sometimes he names characters in one list, which he doesn't transfer to his more comprehensive list. So it's not that simple. I think that what I'm seeing in my research is that there's an attempt to try to systematize the characters, but this takes a long time. It takes really more than a century, really, to come to some kind of agreement to what those characters are. And even then, it does vary. Authors find their own, sometimes out of their own interest, sometimes out of their own amusement, I think. It does vary a lot. It's not unusual to see several different characters for the same thing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
John.
Thank you very much indeed for a fascinating paper about very complex matter. I've I hope quite simple and straightforward question. It's this: does Forman himself adopt personally any particular character, alchemical or astrological, as a sort of favorite and personal sigil? And I have a reason for asking it. It's that Hermann Boerhaave in the 18th century did do that, although his alchemy was rather quiet. And that alchemy concentrated basically on Mercury. He was a mercurialist. But he adopts personally and publicly the sigil of Mercury. It's in some of his portraits, and everyone knows he works under the sign of Mercury. And I just wondered if this was common or not in the 16th and 17th century, if there's any other examples of this.
It's a good question. I don't think Forman did. At least I haven't come across that.
Yeah.
He, as an astrologer, I mean, the astrological signs he used all the time. Those characters are everywhere all the time.
Yeah.
The closest I can think of is sort of an obvious one of D in the Monas Hieroglyphica.
Yes, something
Although
like
he didn't
that.
use that as his own,
Yeah.
as his own sigil. I don't think so, and I can't think of any other examples. Your examples are really interesting, and
Okay.
it's interesting that it's later. because you would think that it would
Yes,
be
much
an earlier,
later.
and it's possible I will come across them as I research more. I mean,
Well, I'd be very interested if you did, and also interested if you or anyone else ever finds out why Boerhaave did this in such a public way. So thank you very much indeed, Ellen. Thank you.
thank you.
So we have a YouTube question from Elena Morgana, who's wondering what is the relation to numerology and symbols in Forman's work. Does he mention mathematics? That's two questions, actually.
Yeah, they're related. Thanks, Elena, or Elena. So he does mention numerology. He does mention numerology, and especially in terms of names. So he uses numerology to comprehend the importance and significance of names. He has 2 tracts on geomancy, and so there's kind of some mathematical basis to that. But he, as far as I see, he doesn't call those characters. I mean, other writers do, talking about, certainly Agrippa does, talks about the mathematical characters. Forman doesn't. So he does address both numerology, geomancy, and, well, I mean, he wasn't a mathematician himself, but sort of numbers. He does address them, but he doesn't seem to relate them to characters the way I've just been talking about. Which isn't to say that he didn't relate them in his mind. He may have. It's possible. That's part of the research I'm doing. I'm trying to figure out what aspects fall into characters, and does that mean that there's a certain, therefore, relationship intellectually and philosophically between these different systems. I hope that answers your question. Thanks, Elena.
Okay, Elena, if you want to come back, let us know, and we'll sort of carry on discussion in a minute. I've just been sort of having a quick glance at Forman's Wikipedia entry, which we all know is a Wikipedia entry is a Wikipedia entry. But it seems to me he never published anything unless I've missed it. So, so two questions. I mean, most of what you've been talking about comes right at the end of his life. In his sort of, when he's in his 50s, in the early 17th century. And I'm just wondering what people knew about his work, whether circulating manuscripts which people read. I mean, you talk about thousands of pages in the Bodleian. What did people know about him, or didn't they know about him, and it's sort of only people like yourself who are sort of digging him up again, so to speak. To phrase that better.
So first, he did publish one thing. He published a pamphlet on calculating longitude, but he doesn't actually say how to do it. He just promises that he knows the secret and that he should be contacted. And this was responded to, sorry, I'm getting some echo. This was responded to by, I can't remember who responded, but there was a little bit of going back and forth in in some manuscript, and just, I mean, in publications. And that's it. That's the only thing he published. And he was planning to publish things, but it never came to light. Now, he was known in his own time, and actually Michelle Pfeffer yesterday gave a seminar where she just discussed this, about how the Royal College of Physicians did actually jail him. Let's see, they jailed him for at least a year for the first time, and I think he was jailed again. So for practicing medicine without a license. So he was definitely known, and became known later, sort of with a bad reputation later on. As far as his writings go, though, it seems to be a very small circle. So he trained someone called Richard Napier, whose papers are also preserved in the Admiral collection, at least some of them. And so we know that Napier read him, and I think, and William Lilly read him, and of course Admiral read him, but it's not that he was widely published and widely known. Not his writings. His personality was widely known. He was a very
colorful is the word I would use.
colorful. He was very colorful. That's right. Exactly. And as he gained more money and as he became more famous, and he had thousands and thousands of patients. I mean, obviously word of mouth, he was a very popular physician. He bought velvet gowns, and he dressed the part and sort of dressed as an actual physician, but also magus. You know, he really played it up. So he was known, but I don't know how much his writings were known. Not.
Okay, thank you. So Elena says thank you for your answer. Robert Slynn has a question. Robert.
Hi, Alan. Well done.
Thank you.
Tell me, friend Alan Crox, so he's an amateur historian. He did biochemistry works at Portland Down. Well, he lives in Salisbury. I think he came to his contact with you. He came to the Bodley and looking at the Simon Forman's details. I think he lived in Salisbury, did he, at some stage? Or born in Salisbury.
Salisbury. Do you know? I can't remember. I'm trying to remember now.
But he's been writing a short paper all about Simon Forman, and he'd been looking over, and he went to the Bodley, and he couldn't interpret the alchemical symbols.
And I'm sorry, and he did what?
He couldn't interpret the alchemical symbols.
Ah, yeah. Well, Simon Forman moved around a lot, and yes, he moved around a lot. He was very peripatetic, and he went to London, then he left London, and eventually he ended up in Lambeth, and that's where this work that I've just been working on. That's where he wrote that. So, and he died in Lambeth. So, he actually died on water. A strange story. But yes, he moved around a lot, and he didn't like London at all, so he left and went all the way to Lambeth.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Not that far. Okay. Any more questions, comments?
Actually, I do have one, if I may.
Yes, please do.
So Kepler was actually younger than Forman. Right? So if you look up, Kepler basically started his career in Prague in the 1600s, I think around 1600. So I'm curious why Forman took him as a source and not maybe Copernicus.
Yes, I mean it's a really interesting question. It's true this is an early work by Kepler, and it seems that Kepler's work was interesting to us to astronomers. I mean, in other words, I'd say mostly men who practiced astronomy, which of course wasn't completely divorced from astrology, but those who were more interested in the kinds of mathematical questions Kepler was asking. He gained some, there were men in England who were interested. Astrologers, not so much until later, I think. So William Lilly became very interested in Kepler's work later on. But Forman seems to be, I just don't know how it is that he came across Kepler's work at such an early stage. It's interesting. As I said, what I've read, it was the astronomers who were more interested. So, and I can't imagine that Forman was really mixing so much with people that were asking kind of different questions and had different concerns. Maybe it was just an important book in England at the time that was circulating. And he because it was interested in astrology, because it was a defense of astrology, Simon Forman came to know about it.
Well, the supernova was an extremely well-known event in the first decade of the 17th century, and numerous people wrote about it, including Kepler, obviously. So something that was so interesting and sort of did have strong astronomical and astrological implications, that would a book about it would attract the attention of someone like Forman. I would have thought that where he actually read it, I've got no idea, but presumably there's a census of where this book is held or has been held in libraries in London or England generally. I mean, did Royal College of Physicians have a copy? I've got no idea, but I just thought it has a very good library and would have collected things as they were published.
Yes, and it's even possible that, of course, this was so common to make your own copy, right? So he could have even been working from manuscript of somebody's copy of it. So it was in circulation. But yes, that's true. You're absolutely right. With such a famous event of interest, any book about it may have piqued the interest of the community.
John.
Yes, I wanted to ask Ellen if there are patient records of Forman's. I do remember reading a long time ago that he was notable for, among other things, treating a large number of women. And I wondered what kind of patient records or case books or anything there were, and if they revealed how the kind of elaborate characterology which you've described was, so to speak, put into practice. Yes? I just wondered if there were any evidence of that at all.
So just as far as the casebooks goes, yes, there's a huge number of casebooks. And actually, there's a wonderful project called the Casebook Project, where they're all online. So Lauren Castle led that project, and it's now complete. So you can find them online, all of them, both Simon Forman and Richard Napier. There are casebooks. You're right that he treated a lot of women. I mean, he treated men as well, but it's true that he treated a lot of women, some of whom he slept with. So he was ethically, perhaps in our anachronistic way, complicated. He kept meticulous records a lot of the time. There's really interesting, fascinating information. So I do recommend that website. As far as the characters go, I don't know. I mean, I think that I haven't seen a lot of overlap. So his doctor's practice. Oh, thanks, Anna. That's great. This doctor's practice was very focused. He would draw up a chart. He would
a natal chart.
A natal chart.
Yes,
Sorry, a natal chart. Yes, he would draw up a natal chart. He would diagnose based on that, and he would prescribe based on that, and with all sorts of amazing comments along the way. But
I was just wondering if he, like he put all those characters whether he did that to patients too.
You would think that would be a good remedy since he thought it worked. I don't know of any. I don't know of any, and it might be one of these things which he did. He did make talismans sometimes.
Oh, right.
He did do that.
Yeah.
But directly on the body, like he did to himself. I haven't seen any other evidence of that.
Okay, thank you.
But I haven't read all the case books, so.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got time for one or two more questions, points, if anybody's got anything. Anna's just put into the chat the link for the casebooks project that Ellen mentioned, which is based at the University Library in Cambridge. Okay, sorry.
No, I just said it's an amazing resource.
Right. Well, in that case, I'll bring things to an end. And just to wrap up by saying the next seminar in this series will be on the 25th of September, which will circulate information nearer the time. It's probably too late to register now, but between 11th and 14th of June, the ICHC will be meeting in Valencia, and SHAC and AMBIX have a very strong presence. And then on the 16th to 17th of October at the Science History Institute in Philadelphia, we will be having our autumn or fall meeting. There's still time to offer papers if they're sent to me by the 31st of May. I've circulated details on Chemist and Mersenne and other places, so you can find all the details there. So it just remains for me to thank everybody involved in organizing and running the seminar and sharing the high blood pressure that one gets when dealing with electronic media. And that's Anna Simmons, Rob Johnson, and Becky Martin. But above all, thank Ellen for giving us an absolutely splendid seminar. Very many thanks, Ellen, and have a good evening, stroke afternoon, stroke morning, wherever you happen to be in the world.